On a recent trip to Big Bend National Park near Terlingua, Texas, my wife and I wanted to see the petroglyphs in the park that we've heard so much about, especially the ones at the chimneys, what's known as the chimneys. So here's a picture of the path to the chimneys with the chimneys in the distance. The path is 5 miles round trip, and when we took the path, it was 95 degrees. And as you can see, it's flat, boring, and has snakes, or it had a snake. So here we are at the chimney. Not very exciting in and of itself. But what was worse is we climbed all over the chimneys and we could not find the petroglyphs. So here I am at the end of the return trip, and as you can tell, I'm pretty tired, I'm pretty hot, and we're pretty disappointed that we didn't find them. The next day, we decided to take a raft trip down the Colorado River, and the temperature had gone from 95 degrees to 55 degrees. I think I would have rather had it 95 on the river than 55, but that is our fate. The guide heard us talking about not having seen the petroglyphs, and she kind of said, well, okay, I'm going to tell you about petroglyphs that are sort of like a secret. They're not in any of the literature of Big Bend, and the reason is that they really don't want people going to look at them. So she told us that these petroglyphs are at the end of a road called Indian Head Road, and that's right off of 118, and here's a map. When you get to the parking area, you can see the entrance to the park. It's a barbed wire fence, but there is some posts that you can walk through. A little further on down, you'll see a sign which basically says, leave everything as you found it. It's illegal to deface the petroglyphs or take anything out of the park. So we walked along and we saw a rock that looked to me like it had some white paint on it. Not paint as we know it, but something that the Indians may have put together. So if you take this path, look for that, and then walk behind the big rock to the right, and you'll find the first glyph that we found. And it looks to us like there's a buffalo etched into the rock. So I'll give you a close-up of that so you can see that better. But because it was getting to be nighttime and it was getting very cold, we decided to come back the next day. The next day we walked past a bunch, many, and I have pictures of 2 of them, what are known as metates. These are holes that have been made by sort of mortar and pestle holes where the Native Americans ground down beans to make them easy to cook and more palatable. And then we found our second petroglyph, which appears to be a picture of a person. We don't know, obviously we don't know, is it the person trying to do a self-portrait? Is it a real person, an imaginary person? We don't know. The next petroglyph, if you have to look really hard, you'll see a little sun, what we think is a sun, could be a spider, again, we don't know, etched onto the rock. But I'll get back to the sun a little bit later. Then we found our first sign of damage. Somebody etched their names onto a rock right on top of a petroglyph. And it is rather infuriating to see that. But then if you look at the date, it's 1902, so that's 115 years ago. So I decided it's kind of hard to be judgmental. These people, whoever they were, probably just stumbled upon this rock and, like the Indians, wanted to leave their own glyph there. Then we found another petroglyph, which appears to be another person. Then we found the most interesting one of them all. And to us, it looks like a portrait of a village with streams and rivers running through it. And if you look at the rocks, you can see where they're the hills, the mountains, if you will, around the area. You can see that there are, in fact, waterfalls that probably occur on occasion. So I researched the area, the weather history of that area, and found that some people think that the glyphs are 9,000 years old, and that 9,000 years ago, that this part of Big Bend was actually wet. So it's possible that somebody carved into the rock a picture of their village when it was wet, and getting back to the sun, that's when the area started to dry out. So maybe they had to leave. I don't know. All I know is it's very, very fascinating. So once again, we had to get going, and we found some more damage. Again, 1902, probably the same people. But if you decide to take this trip, spend as much time as you can, because there's fascinating rock formations in that area as well. And this is a picture of one of the rocks that I think is really particularly fascinating. Looks like a lava flow. So I hope you get to take this the hidden trip and find your way to these petroglyphs. You'll be happy that you did.